Victory over drugs is our cause, a just cause. And with your help, we are going to win.
Freeway Rick Ross was the Los Angeles crack kingpin in the 1980s. It was so accessible that it became a real gold mine for cartels. And a gold mine helps political armies too.
The Contras was backed by the CIA, and it sparked this big investigation by this reporter called Gary Webb.
Gary connected the dots from Rick Ross all the way to the CIA via Nicaraguan cartels and their kingpins. It gets worse. We like to think that government organizations have our best interests at heart. Sometimes, our interests are a bit different, so the discussion gets a little murky. But it's safe to say all citizens want to feel protected by their government in their country. So why was the CIA dealing crack cocaine in the 1980s? You heard right. Throughout history, CIA has been accused of a long list of wild things, from monstrous experiments to funding all the wrong projects. And funding drug trafficking in South America is one of them.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
What led them to this? How did they attempt to cover it up? And what were the massive consequences? We'll explore these questions and many more in today's video. Between 1964 and 1975, Vietnam was home to a ravaging war as the Communist government of North Vietnam and its allies, the Viet Cong, fought the anti-communist South Vietnam government. The latter had the US as allies. As you probably know, the United States has always been a strong anti-communist force. The US's heavy involvement in the Vietnam War can also be seen as a manifestation of the Cold War between the States and the Soviet Union and their allies. As the Soviet Union and China poured weapons and supplies into the North, the US brought 500,000 troops to the South, and the result was a real horror show for Vietnam. Over 2 million civilians and 1 million soldiers lost their lives, and the country took decades to recover from poverty, trauma, and destruction caused by the war. The US had withdrawn their troops in 1973, but the US, and more specifically the CIA, never stopped their anti-communist efforts around the world. And so we fly from Vietnam all the way to Nicaragua in Central America. In 1979, Nicaragua's dictatorial government was overthrown by a group of socialist revolutionaries called Sandinistas, and as it goes with so many such groups, they called themselves the Liberation Army, but they were just as dictatorial as their predecessors. Just look at the USSR's Joseph Stalin. He killed somewhere between 6 and 9 million people, most of them simply for disagreeing with his system. Sadly, one extreme often leads to another, and the conflict never stops. So after the Sandinistas took over the Nicaraguan government, a union of right-wing groups called the Contras formed as the opposition. The Contras led a violent pre-military campaign against the new government, but they needed money for weapons and influence. Enters the CIA. The CIA started sending money and weapons to the Contras in an attempt to stop the spread of communism in the region. President Ronald Reagan explained that, once again, this was all about the Cold War between the US and the Soviets.
If we cut off the freedom fighters, we will be giving the Soviets a free hand in Central America, handing them one of their greatest foreign policy victories since World War II.
But not everyone agreed that the US should be involved in another foreign war, especially after the results in Vietnam. So in 1982, the Democrats passed a law to cut off support for the Contras. That doesn't mean the CIA stopped doing so. They just needed a more subversive way to do it. All of this was happening amidst a skyrocketing demand for coke in the US. The early 1980s were the Pablo Escobar years. Supply and demand snowballed into the largest white powder empire in history, and thanks to Escobar, millions of people were addicted to coke in the States, as well as Central America. But cocaine was expensive, so the cartels came up with crack, or smokable cocaine. According to the American Addiction Centers,
smoking crack results in a more rapid absorption into the bloodstream compared to snorting the powder, causing an instant euphoric effect. This effect, however, is short-lived and wears off almost as quickly as it came on, which can lead individuals into a dangerous cycle of binge use to maintain the high.
In short, it's even more horrible. But it was so accessible that it became a real gold mine for cartels. And a gold mine helps political armies too. So the Contras struck a deal with the Colombian cartels. In 1985, this is what reporters Brian Barker and Bob Perry wrote.
They claimed Nicaraguan rebels were involved in cocaine trafficking, and that not only did the CIA know about these activities, they allowed them to continue in order to help fund the Contras war effort.
Pretty serious allegations. And they got even more serious when they reported the CIA was openly supporting this collaboration. Sadly, it wasn't the CIA that got punished for it. It was the two reporters.
When Bob Perry and Brian Barger got a hold of a CIA report revealing that they were working in the mid-1980s with Contras fighting the Sandinista government, they were warned by their editors that this was not something that was going to make the people that own their newspapers very happy, and both of them ended up losing their jobs.
Imagine doing your job only to be told you're bothering the wrong people high up. But in a way, Bob and Brian had already done their job. The report was leaked and enough people heard about it to spread the rumor. And in 1996, it all became much more than a rumor. However, this time, the tragedy would be even greater. In the mid-1990s, a third reporter, Gary Webb, was looking into the allegations around CIA and crack smuggling. Gary had started his investigation with Freeway Rick Ross.
What's the most money you ever made in a day?
$3 million.
Freeway Rick Ross was the Los Angeles crack kingpin in the 1980s. But he wasn't making his own crack. His supplier was Danilo Blandon, a Nicaraguan exile who happened to be supporting the Contras. Indeed, his white powder profits went straight to the Contras. Gary connected the dots from Rick Ross all the way to the CIA via Nicaraguan cartels and their kingpins, Norman Meneses.
The DEA had always tried to arrest Nora Meneses, who was living openly and raising money for the Contras, but had never been able to build a case against him, and felt like there was something about this guy that must explain why they couldn't do that he was protected, in other words.
Yep, the CIA was protecting Meneses. In 1996, Gary Webb reported this to the American public.
And unveiled how there was a very large, well-documented crack distribution ring that had operated for years, with the CIA turning a blind eye.
Turning a blind eye at best, actively supporting it at worst. Today, Freeway Rick Ross confirmed it, but back then, there was a lot of denial.
When I went to trial, we found out that he was what they call a Contra. The Contras was backed by the CIA, and it sparked this big investigation by this reporter called Gary Webb.
Gary Webb's three-piece report, Dark Alliances, opened up a door to a very dark part of CIA.
Tell America what the story is about. It was about a cocaine ring that operated along the west coast of the United States throughout most of the 80s. And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
It gets worse. According to Gary, it was particularly strange that drugs were being funneled into the states targeting the African American communities. Was this a covert effort to stop them from reaching financial stability, higher education, and political power? As the black communities read Gary's piece, they felt truly betrayed by their government. Again.
It is aimed at African American, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. And for the other non-African people, they should know that this directly will harm them too.
Why was the black community most affected by the crack epidemic? And why were these people punished the harshest for dealing or consuming? Imagine the uproar Gary's report caused. On the one hand, the CIA vehemently denied all accusations.
It is an appalling charge that goes to the heart of this country. I will get to the bottom of it, and I will let you know the results of what I found.
How are we supposed to trust the CIA official to investigate themselves?
Exactly. On the other hand, the article went viral. It was perhaps the first ever viral media bit. In any case, it was the first ever article to be released on paper and online simultaneously. It reached millions of people, and opinions were very divisive. Sadly, other newspapers were under pressure to investigate this issue. And instead of investigating the CIA, they all ganged up on Gary. The LA Times, New York Times, and Washington Post all criticized Gary and the San Jose Mercury News for being in the wrong.
All three major newspapers felt completely caught off guard by this story, so they fully attacked Gary Webb with a vengeance, unlike anything that had ever been seen before, and completely attempted to not only discredit his story and frame it as a conspiracy theory, but pretty much ruin his entire reputation.
Gary Webb lost his job, then his career. In 2004, he shot himself in the head inside his home. Strangely, there were 2 gunshot wounds on his head. which led people to theorize that perhaps the CIA had him killed. But according to the coroner, such rare cases do happen, and according to his wife, sadly, she'd seen it coming. Once more, the CIA covered their actions, but just a few years later, a CIA official confirmed the allegations. In 1998, the CIA's Inspector General confirmed that the CIA knew the coke trade was a major funding source for the Contras and that it let it happen and protected certain people from being investigated.
The CIA admitted that they knew that these guys were selling drugs and had went to the Attorney General and asked the Attorney General could they not report it because the mission that they were trying to accomplish was so big. It was a matter of U.S., what do they call it?
National security?
National security.
Another disturbing thing was revealed about the CIA.
On December the 20th last year, the Latin American Republic of Panama was being liberated.
On December 20th, 1989, thousands of American troops invaded Panama, reportedly to restore democracy and liberate it from its communist dictators. But it was actually a drug bust, an attempt to arrest Manuel Noriega, the Panama dictator and de facto ruler of the country, and a man wanted on drug charges in Miami. What's even creepier, Noriega had been a CIA asset for over 2 decades. They had been protecting him just like they protected Noreen Meneses, as the coke trade was funding the Contras.
The United States is deeply engaged in the anti-communist struggle in the competition with the Soviet Union. The United States was concerned that the Soviet Union was making a play for Latin America. Panama was a key player on the side of the United States.
Shockingly, Noriega started working for the CIA in 1955, around the beginning of the Vietnam War. He'd even received special training in psychological warfare at the School of the Americas.
More than 200 Latin American students, hailing from 18 different nations, study technical skills and leadership techniques at the school.
Some of these men ended up being notorious human rights abusers in Central and South America. By the 1970s, Noriega was a CIA spy and a famous drug trafficker. And just like Pablo Escobar, he decided to enter politics too.
Essentially, he's taking money from drug traffickers to help them out. But at the same time, he's cooperating with the CIA, with military intelligence. He becomes more useful to the CIA and to the DIA, to military intelligence.
Once more, the CIA turned a blind eye to Noriega's rise to kingpin and even protecting him as he climbed the dictatorial ladder. In the words of Vice, the CIA created a cocaine dictator. Even as President Nixon wanted to assassinate Noriega, the CIA stepped in and protected him. He was a key asset, despite his worrying dictatorial antics. In 1983, Noriega took over as the dictator ruler of Panama and made his business with the Colombian cartels unknown fact.
Did drugs get transported in his aircraft through this deal that you arranged?
We set up a deal that ended up in a drug shipment.
Noriega even offered shelter to Pablo Escobar after he killed a high-ranking official. So now he was the CIA's friend, but the DEA's enemy. As the Cold War was fizzling out and the communist threat was no longer strong, the CIA gave in to the DEA's plan to have Noriega arrested. This shows that what's below the tip of the iceberg is truly scary. American government agencies battle over controlling politics in other countries, and any means seems to justify the end. Sometimes, not even the end goal is clear. This is what George Bush said when he became president.
Victory over drugs is our cause, a just cause. And with your help, we are going to win.
But George Bush had been the CIA director during the very years when Noriega was supported and protected. So what was he even saying about just causes? Yeah, this is just one chapter in the disturbing history of the CIA. And today, who even knows what they're doing behind closed doors? Hey guys, thanks for watching. What do you think about the CIA's involvement in the drug trade? Do you know of other creepy government secrets? Let me know in the comments, and before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and click that bell button. On to next time.